When a human body collapses, a medical examiner can usually point to the exact blocked artery or, the specific toxin that caused it.
Yeah.
There is this clinical, almost comforting precision to an autopsy. You look at the liver, you look at the heart, and you say, right there, that is the exact moment the system failed.
Exactly.
It is binary.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
It does. It provides a definitive answer to a really complex collapse. And, I mean, we crave that kind of certainty as humans.
Oh, absolutely.
We want to know exactly what went wrong so we can categorize it, put it in a little box, and hopefully avoid it ourselves.
But then, you zoom out, you aren't looking at a single human body anymore. You are looking at a nation.
Yeah.
A civilization with centuries of history, millions of people, complex geopolitical ties, and deep religious roots. Suddenly, the autopsy table is the size of an entire country.
Right, which is a massive scale shift.
How do you find the cause of death for a whole kingdom? Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at the death certificate of a nation.
We really are.
We are dissecting the collapse of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. And we're using a profoundly detailed historical and theological text for this, the 17th chapter of 2 Kings from the King James Version.
And we are looking at a massive stack of sources for this. Comprehensive theological commentaries, historical analyses, biblical essays, you name it.
Yeah, we've got a lot of material on the table.
We do. And our mission today is to trace this long, slow, agonizing unraveling of a people's identity. We are going to look at the political gambles, the deep psychological rationalizations, and the spiritual realities that literally erased a sovereign state from the map.
And perhaps most importantly for you listening, we are going to discover how these ancient warnings echo perfectly into modern life.
Oh, perfectly.
Because if you think human psychology has changed in the last 3,000 years, you are in for a shock.
Spoiler alert, it hasn't.
It really hasn't.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can understand how this nation died, we have to understand how it was living. We need to look at the map of the ancient Near East.
Right, and that map is it's deeply fractured. To understand the collapse in 722 BC, we actually have to rewind about 200 years.
Okay, let's go back.
Imagine you were living roughly around 930 BC, right after the death of King Solomon.
Okay.
Under David and Solomon, the nation of Israel was a united monarchy. 12 tribes, one king, one massive, glorious temple in Jerusalem.
The Golden Age, basically.
Exactly, but Solomon's later years were heavily compromised. He brought in foreign wives, he built shrines to foreign gods, and to fund his massive building projects, he placed these crushing tax and forced labor burdens on his own people.
I can picture this perfectly. So Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam takes the throne.
Right.
The people are exhausted. They come to Rehoboam and essentially ask for a basic tax cut and, reduction in labor. They say, lighten our load and we will serve you. I mean, it's a completely reasonable request.
It is entirely reasonable. But Rehoboam commits one of the worst political blunders in recorded history.
He really does.
He consults his elder advisors who tell him, look, be a servant to the people today and they will be your servants forever.
Good advice.
Great advice. But then he consults his young friends, his peers, who essentially tell him to project dominance, show them who is boss.
Bad advice.
Terrible advice. Rehoboam listens to the young men. He goes back to the people and says, my father made your yoke heavy, I will make it heavier. My father chastised you with whips, I will chastise you with scorpions.
Just unhinged arrogance, and that sheer arrogance snaps the kingdom in half.
Instantly.
10 of the 12 tribes basically say, well, we are out. They secede under the leadership of a man named Jeroboam.
Yes.
And this is the birth of the divided monarchy. From that moment on, you have two separate, often warring nations living right next to each other on a tiny strip of land.
Exactly.
So let's make sure we clearly define who is who here, because if you're reading the historical accounts, the names alone can make you feel like you need a giant spreadsheet just to keep up.
Oh, you absolutely do. It is a maze. Let's start with the north. The 10 tribes that seceded are known collectively as the Northern Kingdom. But in the texts, you will see them called several things interchangeably. They are most commonly called Israel.
Which is confusing right out of the gate because Israel used to mean everybody.
Precisely. But post-split, Israel almost exclusively refers to the north. You will also see them called Ephraim because Ephraim was the largest, most dominant tribe located right in the heartland.
Right.
It is a bit like how people sometimes say Wall Street when they actually mean the entire U.S. financial system. The part stands for the whole.
that makes sense.
You will also see them referred to as Samaria, which was their fortress capital city built later by King Omri, and occasionally they are called the House of Joseph or simply the 10 tribes.
And their track record over the next 2 centuries is just dismal. I mean, they had 19 different kings across several different dynasties, lots of assassinations.
Oh, many assassinations.
And the historical text grades every single one of them as spiritually evil.
0 good kings. It was a state born in rebellion that never once returned to its covenant roots.
Wow.
Now, looking at the south, they retained 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, plus a lot of the Levite priests who migrated south when the north went completely apostate.
Okay, so the south is known primarily as Judah.
Yes, because Judah was the dominant tribe. You will also see the south called Jerusalem, which is their capital city, or Zion, referring to the sacred Temple Mount, or the House of David.
Right, because they retained the unbroken bloodline of King David on the throne.
Correct. And they had a mix of good kings and bad kings.
I am trying to think of a modern way to conceptualize this, for you listening. It is like a massive family feud where a unified family business splits into 2 rival corporations.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
You have the northern branch and the southern branch. The northern branch takes the original company name Israel, but they completely gut the original mission statement and the product.
Right.
But the absolute nightmare for anyone reading this history is that both families keep naming their kids John and Michael.
Yes. It is notoriously difficult to track. You have cultural naming patterns where kings wanted to honor their ancestors. Furthermore, the prefix Jeho, or the suffix Aya, derives from Yahweh, the name of God.
Oh, interesting.
So both kingdoms are using variations of God's name in their royal titles, even when they aren't following him at all.
That is wild.
Yeah, so you end up with a King Ahaziah in Israel and a King Ahaziah in Judah. You have a Jehoram in the north and a Jehoram in the south.
Sometimes ruling at the exact same time.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this nomenclature is deeply theological. They kept the branding but completely changed the product.
They're using God's name for political legitimacy while actively worshiping idols.
Yes, and that 200-year history of the Northern Kingdom with its 19 evil kings leads us directly to the man who inherited its final, fatal hour, King Hoshea.
Okay, so this is where the autopsy actually begins. Let's look at Hoshea.
The records show that in the 12th year of Ahaz, who was the king of Judah in the south, Hoshea, the son of Elah, became king over Israel in the north. He reigned in Samaria for 9 years. And he got to the throne the way many northern kings did, which is through a violent coup. He assassinated the previous king, Pekah.
But the text gives Hoshea a really interesting qualified performance review, right? The historians write that he did evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him.
Yeah, that is a fascinating detail. Hoshea wasn't an aggressive, zealous promoter of Baal worship like King Ahab had been generations earlier. He was, relatively speaking, slightly less wicked than his predecessors. He might have been a bit more moderate.
Wait, okay, that feels like a massive double standard to me.
How so?
Well, if Hoshea is actively trying to dial back the evil, let's say bringing the national sin level from a 10 down to a 7, why is he the one holding the bag when the kingdom gets utterly destroyed? Doesn't that seem incredibly unfair? I mean, he is the guy trying to improve things.
It is a profound human question, but we really have to look at the foundation here. Improving from an F to a D- is still a failing grade.
Oh, that's fair.
Hoshea's relative mildness couldn't save a kingdom that was built on a completely rotten foundation. He didn't tear down the idols. He didn't return the people to the temple in Jerusalem. He just maintained the status quo of rebellion, perhaps with slightly less enthusiasm.
And God's standard wasn't just be better than Ahab.
Right. God's standard was the covenant. And politically, Hoshea is stepping into a wood chipper anyway.
Yeah, let's talk about the politics, because if you are Hoshea, you are ruling a deeply weakened nation caught in a vice between massive superpowers.
Very true. To the northeast, you have the Assyrian Empire, led currently by Shalmaneser.
The Assyrians were terrifying.
Assyria at this point is the apex predator of the ancient Near East. They are a ruthless, expansionist military machine known for unspeakable cruelty.
And then on the other side.
To the southwest, you have Egypt, an ancient superpower that is currently a shadow of its former self. It's fractured into different dynasties, but it's still projecting this illusion of strength.
So Hoshea is stuck. He is forced to become a vassal to Assyria. He is paying extortion money. The text politely says he gave him presents, but let's define what that actually means.
Oh, it was not presents.
Right. This isn't sending a nice fruit basket to Nineveh. This is crushing annual tribute. Imagine caravans of silver, gold, grain, and livestock being hauled out of Samaria every single year, completely draining the national economy.
All just to keep the Assyrian army from marching in and slaughtering everyone. It was total economic subjugation.
But Hoshea makes a deadly geopolitical gamble here.
He does. He decides he cannot sustain this economic bleeding anymore, so he secretly sends messengers to Syria. So King of Egypt, which historians generally identify as Pharaoh Osirkon IV, and Hoshea just stops paying his annual tribute to Assyria.
It is the ultimate bad bet. Think of Hoshea's Israel as a struggling tech startup. And they took toxic venture capital from a notoriously ruthless firm. That is Assyria.
Good analogy.
The terms are just destroying the company.
Yeah.
So Hoshea, the CEO, secretly tries to get bailed out by a seemingly wealthy angel investor across town, which is Egypt.
Right. But what Hoshea doesn't realize is that Egypt is practically bankrupt themselves. They don't have the military capital to back him up.
And the rival angel investor never even wires the money. Egypt does not show up to help.
Wow.
Shalmaneser discovers the conspiracy. And the Assyrian king doesn't just send a strongly worded warning letter. He swoops in, arrests Hoshea, and throws him in prison. Just like that, the king of Israel is gone. The head is chopped off the snake.
And this failed political conspiracy instantly triggers a devastating military response.
Yes.
Shalmaneser invades the entire land. He marches his massive army right up to the fortified walls of the capital city, Samaria, and lays siege to it.
And a siege in the ancient world is just pure nightmare fuel. They didn't just attack the walls, they surrounded the city with their own camps, they cut off the food supply, they cut off the water supply, and they just waited.
They let time do the work.
Exactly. They let time and human desperation do the fighting for them.
We really need to linger on this for a second because the text mentions this siege lasted for 3 years.
3 years. 3 entire years. From roughly 724 to 722 BC. Imagine you are a citizen locked inside Samaria. Year 1, you are rationing grain, hoping the Egyptian army is marching to save you.
Hoping for a miracle.
Right. But by year 2, the grain is gone. You are eating pack animals, boiling leather. The social order is completely collapsing. Disease is rampant.
It's horrific.
By year 3, you are dealing with literal madness and starvation. And every single day you look over the walls, the Assyrian war machine is just sitting there waiting.
And Assyrians were absolute masters of psychological terror. They would routinely flay captives alive in front of the city walls to induce the defenders to surrender.
Good grief.
Finally, in Hoshea's 9th year, the city's defenses fail. The starving defenders can no longer hold the gates. Samaria falls. And with it, the northern kingdom of Israel literally ceases to exist as a sovereign nation.
But the Assyrians didn't just conquer them, loot the treasury, and, leave a local governor in charge. The historians record that the king of Assyria carried Israel away. He placed them in Hala, in Hobor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes.
This was the hallmark of Assyrian imperial policy, mass deportation. And we really need to understand that this wasn't just a logistical punishment. It was a highly sophisticated, brutally effective form of psychological and cultural warfare.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the logistics here, though. Moving tens of thousands of starving people on foot across the ancient Near East, hundreds of miles away, is a massive, incredibly expensive headache for the Assyrian army.
Oh, massive.
Why go to all that trouble? Why not just kill the leaders and enslave the rest in their own fields? There has to be a deeper psychological strategy at play here.
You hit the nail on the head. The Assyrians realize that people rebel because they have a shared identity. They have a shared language, shared holy sites, shared ancestral lands where their grandfathers are buried, and a shared history.
Right, they have roots.
Exactly. If you conquer a people and leave them in their land, eventually they will rise up. They will unite around that common heritage. So the Assyrians systematically uprooted the conquered populations. They marched them hundreds of miles away into modern-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran.
It is like taking a completed jigsaw puzzle. This beautiful picture of a cohesive nation. You violently break the puzzle apart, and you toss a handful of those pieces into 5 completely different puzzle boxes scattered across your house.
That is exactly the mechanism. And the pieces you are tossing them in with belong to other conquered nations. You mix the population so thoroughly that within a generation or two, the original language is lost.
The cultural memory is erased.
Erased. The religious practices are diluted by intermarriage. The picture is gone forever. I mean, you cannot organize a rebellion if you don't even share a language or a history with your next-door neighbor.
This specific horrific strategy is the origin of a phrase people still use today, right? The 10 lost tribes of Israel.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that they never came back. Unlike the southern kingdom of Judah, which would later be exiled to Babylon but allowed to return 70 years later and rebuild, the northern kingdom was permanently dissolved into the melting pot of the Assyrian Empire. They were assimilated out of existence.
But one thing our sources emphasize really heavily is that the historical record does not romanticize their disappearance.
No, it doesn't.
It is not framed as some grand, tragic mystery of history. The autopsy report presents this as the devastating but entirely just consequence of their own actions.
Right.
The narrative actually pauses right here. The historians stop talking about the troop movements and the geopolitics. They deliver a divine indictment. We move from the historical what happened to the theological why it happened.
The text states it so plainly. It says this happened because the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, and they had feared other gods.
It's a stunning indictment.
It really is. They took the God who liberated them from slavery, and they completely turned their backs on him to walk in the statutes of the heathen.
And the historians mention they walked in the statutes of the kings of Israel. To understand that, we have to look at the original sin of the northern kingdom, which goes all the way back to their very first king, Jeroboam I.
Let's trace that.
Yeah, let's trace this disease back to its origin. What did Jeroboam do that doomed the nation 2 centuries later?
Well, when Jeroboam led the secession, he had a massive political problem. The temple, which was the only authorized place of worship for Yahweh, was in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was the capital of his rival, the southern kingdom of Judah.
Right. If you are Jeroboam, you are terrified. You are thinking, if my citizens keep crossing the border 3 times a year to worship at the temple in Jerusalem, eventually they're going to feel nostalgic.
Naturally.
They're going to hear the old songs, see the old priesthood, their hearts will turn back to the house of David, and they will assassinate me.
Exactly. It was a purely pragmatic political calculation. So Jeroboam creates an alternative religious system. He builds 2 golden calves.
Golden calves? Where have we heard that before?
Right. Terrible track record with golden calves. He places one in Bethel at the southern border to intercept traffic heading to Jerusalem, and one in Dan at the northern border. And he tells the people, look, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of Egypt.
Which is a direct, flagrant violation of the foundational commandments.
Yeah.
You shall have no other gods,
Yeah.
and you shall not make carved images.
It is. And here is the crucial nuance of how this disease started. Jeroboam probably didn't intend for the calves to represent foreign gods at first.
Really?
Yeah, he was likely presenting them as visible pedestals for Yahweh, but you cannot worship the true God in a false way. That pragmatism, born out of political fear, opened a door that never closed again.
It set a 200-year trajectory.
Once you decide you can alter God's commands to fit your political convenience, you have lost the foundation entirely. You become the author of your own morality.
I'm fascinated by the psychology of this because the historians note something deeply revealing. Here's where it gets really interesting. They write that the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. They built high places from watchtowers to fortified cities. But why secretly?
It's a great question.
If the whole nation is doing it, from the king down to the peasants, why the secrecy?
Because their conscience was still active. They still had the cultural memory of the Exodus. They knew the Torah. They knew what they were doing was a violation of the covenant. People only hide what they know is shameful. It is a manifestation of profound cognitive dissonance.
It is like a modern person who attends church publicly on Sunday, sings the songs, shakes hands, but lives in deep, hidden moral compromise Monday through Saturday.
A hypocritical double life.
Exactly. They want the social standing of being a good person, but they want the illicit, immediate benefits of their hidden life.
They were maintaining a painted face of Yahweh worship. They kept the name of God in their royal titles. They probably still observed certain modified festivals to feel pious. But in the dark, they were practicing complete depravity. They wanted the benefits of paganism without public exposure.
But the autopsy shows that the disease didn't stay secret.
It never does.
You can't keep an aggressive cancer hidden forever. It metastasizes into the open. The text details a horrifying descent. They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every green tree. They worshiped the starry hosts. They served Baal. They used divination and enchantments.
It's a complete collapse.
We really need to unpack what this actually looked like on the ground. Because when we say worshipped Baal or Asherah poles, it sounds very clinical to our modern ears. It sounds like they just chose a different marble statue to bow to. But the sources are clear that this was a deeply sensual sex religion.
It was.
How did the mechanics of that actually work in an ancient society?
Well, ancient Canaanite fertility cults were not about abstract theology or moral betterment. They were about securing agricultural and human prosperity through sympathetic magic.
Sympathetic magic.
Yeah. Baal was the storm god, the bringer of rain. Asherah was a fertility goddess. To ensure the crops would grow, the rain would fall, and the flocks would multiply, the worshippers believed they needed to physically stimulate the gods to act.
And they did this through temple prostitution and highly erotic public rituals.
Yes. They blended worship with raw, fleshly desires. Imagine how incredibly seductive that is to human nature. Yahweh demanded holiness, ethical behavior, justice for the poor, care for the widow, and moral purity.
That's a high bar.
It is.
Yeah.
But the pagan gods basically said, come to the shrine under the green tree, indulge your deepest, darkest carnal appetites, and in return, we will make your farm prosperous.
It is a religion that essentially rubber stamps your lowest impulses and calls it a holy duty. But the text shows the progression gets darker, much darker. The historians explicitly state that eventually they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire.
This is the absolute nadir of their spiritual collapse. This is child sacrifice, almost certainly, to the Ammonite god Moloch.
This is where I struggle to comprehend the human element.
It's hard to fathom.
How does a society that originated with the Exodus, a people who had the Ten Commandments, who knew intimately that God valued human life, how do they gradually sink to the level of literally burning their own children alive?
It is a testament to the fact that the normalization of evil happens gradually. It is not an overnight shift. It starts with Jeroboam's pragmatic golden calves, just a slight alteration of worship for political convenience.
Just a little compromise.
Right. And 200 years later, it ends in the fire. The twisted psychology behind child sacrifice is rooted in supreme desperation and a warped view of the divine economy.
I want to understand the psychology of that desperation. How does a parent rationalizes that act?
In the ancient pagan worldview, the gods were capricious, angry, and incredibly demanding. If there was a severe multi-year famine or a massive Assyrian army gathering on your border, you believed the gods were furiously angry with you.
Okay.
So to appease them, to manipulate them into saving you, you had to offer them the most valuable, costly thing you possessed. And what is more valuable than your own child?
Wow.
It is the ultimate, horrific, transactional religion. They believed that by violently giving up their future, they could buy security in the present.
It is the ultimate betrayal of the giver of life. And there's a theological principle here that our sources highlight repeatedly. Humans become like what they worship.
Yes, that's a huge theme.
The text says they followed vanity, which means worthless, empty idols. And they themselves became vain or worthless. They worshipped hollow, deaf, unfeeling statues, and their society became hollow, devoid of empathy, justice, or truth.
But we must emphasize that God did not let this happen in a vacuum. He did not watch silently from heaven while they drifted toward the fire. The text makes it very clear that the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and by all the seers, saying, "Turn ye from your evil ways."
God was relentlessly sending messengers.
Relentlessly.
It wasn't a sudden judgment. He sent Elijah to dramatically confront the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. He sent Elijah with undeniable miracles. He sent Amos, this rugged shepherd, to roar against their social injustice, their wealth inequality, and their religious hypocrisy.
He sent Hosea, whose entire life was a living, agonizing metaphor. God actually told Hosea to marry a woman who would continually be unfaithful to him. Why? To physically demonstrate to the nation of Israel how their spiritual adultery felt to God. They were the unfaithful spouse running after lovers, and Yahweh was the broken-hearted, patient husband begging them to come home.
But the tragedy is recorded perfectly. The text says, notwithstanding they would not hear, but hardened their necks, like to the neck of their fathers. They preferred the gods that approved of their desires. They wanted the benefits of the covenant without the constraints of the covenant.
Which leads us inexorably to the final verdict handed down by the divine judge. The hammer finally falls. The Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only.
This is the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. The historians are pulling threads from centuries earlier. If you go all the way back to Deuteronomy 28 or Leviticus 26, Moses laid out the covenant terms explicitly before they ever entered the land.
Very clearly.
He told the people, if you obey, you will be blessed in the land. But if you forsake Yahweh and turn to idols, the ultimate curse will be foreign domination and exile from the land.
God is simply honoring the terms of the contract they freely signed at Mount Sinai. But as Israel is being marched away in chains by the Assyrians, there is a massive warning light flashing for the southern kingdom.
Oh, absolutely.
The text explicitly calls out Judah, saying they also kept not the commandments of the Lord, but walked in the statutes of Israel.
Judah's position is incredibly precarious at this moment. Under King Ahaz, who is ruling in Jerusalem during the fall of Samaria, Judah is highly wicked and compromised. Ahaz actually set up pagan altars in Jerusalem and nailed the doors of the temple shut.
Yes. Judah is imitating the very sins that are destroying their northern neighbors.
Wait, let me see if I'm tracking the logic here. If Judah is doing the exact same things, why did they survive? Why didn't the Assyrians just march a few miles south and wipe them out too?
It's a fair question.
I mean, watching Israel fall to Assyria and still not fully repenting is like watching your older sibling touch a hot stove, get severely burned, and then reaching out to touch it yourself. How does Judah get a pass?
It is sheer folly on Judah's part. But Judah's survival had absolutely nothing to do with their own righteousness or performance.
And what was it?
It had everything to do with God's faithfulness to his own promises. God had made a specific, unconditional covenant with King David centuries earlier, promising that his line would endure and that the Messiah would eventually come through the tribe of Judah. God preserved Judah not because they deserved it, but to protect the redemptive plan for all of humanity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources point out that there are behind-the-scenes spiritual battles happening here. The historical narrative shows Assyrian armies, Egyptian alliances, and economic tribute, but there is an invisible cosmic war raging just beneath the surface.
Absolutely. The biblical worldview asserts that human history is not just the product of economic forces, military strategy, and supply chains. Satan was constantly attempting to wipe out the descendants of Abraham to prevent the arrival of the promised Messiah.
Right.
If the entire nation of Israel, north and south, is annihilated or assimilated into pagan cultures, the messianic bloodline is severed. The battle is ultimately about loyalties. Yahweh versus the demonic forces behind the idols, truth versus the lies of the surrounding culture.
And as a quick framing note for everyone listening, as we discuss these massive geopolitical shifts and the rise and fall of empires, our sources maintain a strict rule of impartial reporting regarding modern political parallels.
Yes, that's important to clarify.
We're not endorsing any modern political viewpoint here, whether we are talking about ancient Assyria, Babylon, or any modern superpower today. The biblical text simply posits a specific theological view. God is the ultimate sovereign over human history. Empires rise and fall, but the text asserts that no nation operates outside of divine allowance.
A vital point of context. Now, returning to the text, Israel is gone. The 10 tribes have been marched off into oblivion. But the physical land of Samaria isn't empty.
Right. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the Assyrian Empire. Shalmaneser looks at this empty puzzle board and decides to fill it with pieces from entirely different games. This is where the story gets incredibly bizarre.
It really does. The king of Assyria executes the second phase of his deportation policy. He brings in foreigners from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settles them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites.
He takes 5 distinct groups of pagan peoples from completely different cultural and linguistic backgrounds and dumps them all into the empty houses, farms, and vineyards of Samaria.
But the historians record a very visceral, immediate problem. They write that at the beginning of their dwelling there, these foreigners feared not the Lord. Therefore, the Lord sent lions among them, which slew some of them.
I have to pause on the sheer wildness of this detail.
It's intense.
Why lions? If God is trying to make a theological point to a bunch of transplanted pagans, why not a famine or a plague of locusts or a disease? Why actual man-eating lions roaming the streets of Samaria?
This raises an important question about how the ancient world viewed the divine. In ancient Near Eastern thought, deities were intensely territorial. They were gods of the land.
Okay, so tied to the geography.
Exactly. The foreigners who were forcibly moved into Samaria didn't view Yahweh as the sovereign creator of the universe. They just thought of him as the local landlord. And because they weren't paying the landlord his due respect, the landlord released the hounds, or in this case, the lions.
God is using a painful, terrifying, physical disruption to assert his sovereignty over the dirt itself. He is proving to these imported pagans and to the watching world that just because Israel was defeated by Assyrian weapons, it did not mean Yahweh was defeated by Assyrian gods. He still owns the territory.
Exactly. So the settlers completely panic. They send an urgent message back across the empire to the king of Assyria, essentially saying, "We don't know the rules of the local god of the land, and he is killing us with lions. Send help."
And the Assyrian king's solution is darkly comedic. He orders one of the exiled Israelite priests to be sent back to Samaria, specifically to the city of Bethel, to teach these foreigners how to worship the God of the land.
But consider deeply who he is sending back. He is sending back a priest from the northern kingdom, a priest from a religious system that was fundamentally corrupt from day one, established by Jeroboam, revolving around golden calves, syncretism, and secret sin.
You are hiring a failed, corrupt employee who just bankrupted the company to run the training seminar for the new hires. Isn't that just going to teach them the wrong way all over again?
Which is exactly what happens. The corrupt priest teaches them how to fear the Lord, but it is a fear based entirely on sheer terror of the lions, not true repentance or covenant love, and this leads to a disastrous religious mess that defines the region for centuries.
The text details the birth of syncretism here. It says every national group made their own gods and set them up in the high places that the Samaritans had built.
It becomes a theological free-for-all. The Babylonians made Succoth-Benoth, the men of Cutha made Nergal, Hamath made Ashima, the Avites made Nibhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvaim, in a horrifying continuation of the absolute worst practices of the Canaanites, burned their children in the fire to Adramelech and Anamelech.
The historians sum up their spiritual state in one devastating sentence. They feared the Lord and served their own gods.
That is the textbook definition of syncretism. It is the blending of true worship with false worship. They added Yahweh to their pantheon just to keep the lions away, but they maintained their deep devotions to their old gods out of nostalgic appeal, cultural comfort, and the promise of fleshly indulgence.
Imagine how a family in this era might actually structure their week. It is like making a theological buffet plate. You wake up, you offer a quick sacrifice to Yahweh, that is your fire insurance, just enough to keep the lions off your back.
Right.
But then, in the afternoon, you load up the rest of your plate. You go to the shrine of Nergal or Ashima because those are your favorite comforting idols that let you live however you want.
And biblically, syncretism is often treated as more dangerous than outright paganism because it carries the deceptive illusion of obedience. There are profound typological and allegorical aspects here. In biblical typology, Assyria and these foreign nations often represent the flesh or the world. When a believer compromises with the world, trying to serve God while simultaneously serving the idols of culture, wealth, or status, it results in a diluted, powerless spirituality that cannot save.
It creates a hybrid religion that pleases no one, least of all God. And historically, this moment is incredibly significant for anyone who reads the New Testament. This mixed population with their mixed religion, living in the territory of Samaria, these are the ancestors of the Samaritans.
Precisely. For the next 700 years, the Jewish people in the south would look at the Samaritans in the north with absolute disdain. They viewed them as half-breeds with a corrupted, illegitimate religion born out of fear of lions. The racial and religious animosity was intense.
Which makes the New Testament so much more profound. Think about Jesus. When Jesus deliberately travels through Samaria and sits down at a well to speak with a Samaritan woman in John chapter 4, he is bridging a 700-year-old gap of deep hostility.
It's beautiful.
He is bringing the living water to the descendants of the very people who replaced the exiled Israelites.
It is a stunning display of grace. He doesn't send lions, he brings salvation. But the tragedy of the ancient text we are studying today is how long that generational compromise lasted. The chapter closes with a melancholic reality. It says, "So these nations feared the Lord and served their graven images, both their children and their children's children, as did their fathers, so do they unto this day."
Generational compromise is incredibly hard to break. The patterns we establish today become the prisons our grandchildren live in tomorrow. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We have walked through the historical map, the geopolitics, the horrific siege, the deportations, and the theological autopsy. Let's bring all these ancient threads together and land the plane in your modern life.
The primary purpose of this text is not just to inform us about ancient Near Eastern history. It is framed as an encouragement, a profound teaching moment, and a stark warning for believers today.
Let's start with the warning. The fall of Israel proves that persistent, secret sin ultimately leads to public discipline. National or cultural identity, even claiming the name of God, does not protect anyone from the consequences of rejecting him. But my question is, how does a modern person practically identify their own high places? We aren't literally building shrines under oak trees or casting golden calves anymore.
Modern idolatry rarely looks like an ancient statue. A modern idol is whatever we sacrifice our time, our morality, or even our children's futures for in order to gain security, prosperity, or pleasure outside of God's design.
So it could be a career, it could be political power, it could be an addiction to status, approval, or comfort.
Exactly. If you are willing to compromise your ethics to secure a promotion, that career is your Asherah pole. If you are sacrificing your family's well-being on the altar of financial success, you are dealing with a modern manifestation of Molech. The gods have changed their names, but the human psychological drive to manipulate the universe for our own benefit remains exactly the same.
And the cognitive dissonance is the same. The temptation to feel the Lord on Sunday, but serve our own gods the rest of the week. To maintain the painted face of religion while our hearts truly belong to the culture.
But the text also offers immense encouragement. God is profoundly patient. Think about the timeline we discussed. From the original sin of Jeroboam to the fall of Samaria was over 200 years.
That is a long time.
For 2 centuries, God sent prophets, warnings, and opportunities to repent. He is not eager to judge. He is long-suffering.
And he always preserves a remnant. Even in the darkest times, when the north was completely swept away, God preserved Judah. Not because they were perfect, but because he was faithful to his covenant to bring the Messiah into the world.
For the believer in Jesus Christ, this highlights an overwhelming gratitude for the new covenant. The old covenant kings failed repeatedly. The system was broken by human sin, but the new covenant is mediated by Jesus Christ, a king who cannot fail, a priest who is never corrupt, and a mediator who perfectly fulfilled the law on our behalf.
It calls for a renewal of the mind. Trading the vanity of the world, the hollow promises of syncretism, for the actual substance of Christ. We don't have to live in fear of the lions of judgment, because the Lion of the tribe of Judah has already conquered.
And that is the ultimate takeaway. The Autopsy of Israel shows us the terminal disease of idolatry, but it points us toward the only known cure, which is wholehearted, uncompromised devotion to the true God.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. From the political conspiracies of a desperate King Hoshea, through a horrifying 3-year siege, to the psychological warfare of Assyrian deportation.
We really went everywhere.
We looked at the original sin of political convenience, the dark descent into child sacrifice, and the bizarre arrival of lions that led to the birth of the Samaritans.
It is a heavy history, but it is deeply necessary. It is the divine proof that secret compromises eventually, inevitably, result in public collapse.
It brings us right back to that medical examiner looking at the autopsy table. We have seen exactly where the heart of the nation stopped. But the question isn't just about ancient history. It is about us. So I want to leave you, our listener, with this lingering thought to chew on as you go about your week. We look back and easily judge ancient Israel for hiding their idols while pretending to serve God. We shake our heads at their syncretism. But if the God of the land audited your internal kingdom today, what secret, custom-made gods from your past are you still paying tribute to in the dark? Thank you for joining us on this intense exploration. Keep questioning, keep reading, and as always, keep diving deep.